Janica stared in absolute awe. Her new cabin was basically sparkling. The wood was fresh and clean and very beautiful. The spirit sorcerer had not known that things could be built this fast. Meanwhile, the animal spirits were so exhausted that they were lying half dead on the floor. Janica scolded them for working so hard when she had told them to take it easy. The poor fire spirit monk tried to explain that Tarkin would in no way accept the work taking longer, but then he just gave up and mumbled about how he could ascend now. The exhausted fire spirit wished Janica to have a happy camp life, and he said that would be enough for them. That was all that the poor overworked spirits needed. They then proceeded to really ascend right before their eyes, and the girl happily waved as they wished away, thanking them for their help. It turned out that the spirits were just being unsummoned, and it felt strange. But she was still very grateful for their assistance in these matters. Then, a stick was taken up and a line was drawn in the sand. It was Janica, and she had carved out a few characters that spelt out cohabitation. The girl beamed with joy with a bright flush on her face as she had taken one step closer to achieving her goal of living right beside the man that she loved. Suddenly the door behind her opened and her eyes widened. She thought it was Ed, but it was in fact Lucy, who casually strolled out of Ed's house with her clothes rumpled. The sleepy talented mage yawned and then locked eyes with the spirit sorcerer. They were neighbors now, and the smaller girl took note of the little carved letters that spelt out cohabitation. The mage then smiled rather smugly as she knew she was one step closer to that since she lived right inside her crush's house. Lucy stood in her rumpled glory with her hands at her waist as she beamed, letting it be known that sleeping together was far above cohabitation. Basic aspectual magic. A new article had been revealed. New aspectual magic. A level 1 manifestation was finally something that Ed had unlocked. He tried out the magic, playing with it on his fingers with awe. Even Merylda hovered near as he played with it, and she noted that it was another fail. Aspectual magic was a lot more difficult than she had expected, and she asked if the main character could even get a grasp on the mana flow. The blonde boy studied and worked with Lucy, casually napping on his lap. He was not sure about the new form of magic, but he had to at least try. The talented mage yawned and said that for aspectual magic, it was important to understand the principles first. Magic was a study in which both theory and senses coexist. He will get a feel for it after repeated practice. Just for a spin, Lucy tested out controlling the axe and a few objects around the camp. Completely showing off, she lifted a bunch of things and commended some of his repeated practicing. The boy admitted that he had done it 2 or 3 times as he patted her head, and the girl blushed in surprise. The blonde admitted that it would have been easy for a genius like Lucy, and who would have known that Glock's introduction to aspectual magic would exist. Meanwhile, the silver-haired mage was suffering under the sweet attention of her crush's pats. The lad had thought of aspectual magic as the kind of thing that could not be learned in the game. Aspectual magic was magic that needed to easily manipulate time, space, and your mind, so when it came to it, it was the greatest in power. However, because it went against providence and the natural order, it was the most difficult and unresearched magic. Apart from the danger, it was hard to understand. Lucy had learned it using her intuition, so it would be difficult for her to teach. She had tried a few times and used it as easily as breathing. It would have been great if he had Professor Glass, since the mage had been an actual experienced teacher who was versed in aspectual magic. Yeah, if the professor was still alive, then he would have been a great teacher, and the blonde sighed in regret. Suddenly, someone noted that there was yet another woman. Ed looked up in surprise as the newcomer said that even if the blonde had large aspirations as a man, who knew what kind of hell he would really face at this rate? It was Ziggs, and the wolf boy was so shocked that he had dropped his present to the floor. The boy had noticed Merylda and had dismissed her immediately with a drab look on his face. The forest spirit wept as she was having so much fun reading. The wolf boy apologized then for jumping to conclusions. He had not realized that the other woman was the spirit from last time. Then the blonde asked why Ziggs had visited. The boy had brought the old magic books that had asked for that needed to be scrapped. The main character asked the wolf boy to pass on his thanks to Elka. He needed to start from the basics, so borrowing them each would be annoying. It must have been heavy, so the blonde thanked the boy once more. Ed was just thinking that he ought to do something to thank Ziggs, but the wolf boy insisted that it was fine. However, if the blonde really insisted, then he could help the wolf boy out with doing some student council work. The wolf boy was flattered, but because of the previous incident with Tanya, the student council president now trusted him a lot. She seemed to want to put other people she trusted near her. So, the boy was asking if the blonde would like to work as part of the student council. Ed wondered if it was okay to be so half-assed about its formation, and the wolf boy insisted that it was not half-assed, since this was the first time in Sylvanian history that a first year had become the student council president. Tanya was planning on making the cabinet the best that it could be. The lady from the Kirill County in the 3rd year and 4th year top student Deke had already joined. In the future, she wanted 1st year magic faculty top student Joseph, 3rd year top assistant Annie's, 4th year top alchemy faculty student Dorothy, and Ed as well. Tanya was only gathering trustworthy and talented people. However, Ziggs already guessed that Ed would reject the role anyway. Ed considered rejecting the role, and the wolf boy sighed. The blonde did magic engineering, spirit sorcery, stamina training, camping, and academy scholarship student work. He was also training in a new type of magic, so there was no helping it. The wolf boy sighed that he expected Ed to reject the role, but the student council president would be disappointed. Meanwhile, Ed had not even given a response and he was flabbergasted to hear that the wolf boy expected the rejection anyway. After saving Tanya and having the scenario turn into something unknown, small predictions felt meaningless. Ziggs joining the student council was unexpected in the first place, and the entire list he stated was also unexpected. According to the timeline, the joint combat training would be happening soon, and this was supposed to be the biggest event before the third act's final event, which was supposed to be Lucy's subjugation. This event, which happened again for the second 9-year seniors who were the generation of the protagonist, had an incident where first-year alchemy top student, Claude, loses in the final battle and drinks the forbidden drug called Evil God's Blood. The main character remembered that event well as one with an unpleasant ending. However, the scenario was now far out of Ed's hands. Whether it flowed as he knew it or flowed in a completely new direction, it was all unknown. Meanwhile, a cart with intricately designed wheels rolled on the road. It was in fact a mighty chariot. Unless mages spent all night casting weight lightning magic, this was a giant carriage that could never move. The might of the forces guarding him was like that of an army, so the holy city's citizens saw this grand approaching carriage and called it the Wheeled Palace. Due to the resources being used becoming a waste, this palace did not often go far from the holy imperial capital, and it had just 2 people sitting at the top. It was further than one of the men expected, and he laughed that it was a relief that they could see the Saintess situation coming all this way. The first man was the Archbishop Verdio, and the second person thanked Verdio for planning a visit to the nearby noble territories as it made the planning perfect. The bigger man with the fancy garments was the Holy Pope Eldine. The Pope smiled, feeling quite pleased that they would be at Sylvania soon. Since the Holy Pope would be visiting, there must be no problems with the preparations. There was so much to do and everyone was working to make sure that everything would be spick and span. Tanya worried that the Holy Pope Eldine, who ruled the Holy City Carpia, and the Archbishop Verdio, who assisted the Holy Pope, would both be visiting at once. The goal of their visit was to spread the word about the grace of the god, Telos, and to perform new baptisms, but these were all just for appearances. The student council was in a state of panic as everyone rushed around to prepare. The really important part was the meeting request. They were worried about Saintess Clara since she was like the heart of the order. Then Tanya realized that there was one more meeting request. For some reason, the Holy Pope really wanted to meet the second-year student Adele. Anyway, they had to plan Tanya's schedule out such that she could also meet the Saintess. Today, the Holy Pope would be visiting them all the way from the Holy Imperial Capital, which was why instead of Kylie, the secret Saintess student had to set aside her disguise and let the maids comb her hair as she would be presented in her true face, and by her true name in front of the students for the first time in a while. Today was the day of the joint combat training as well, and it would unfortunately overlap with the Pope's visit, so Kylie would not be able to attend. The girl was a little sorrowful as she found it very unfortunate. She had been looking forward to interacting with the other grades after all. The sulky girl did not want to return to the Holy Imperial Capital, and student life was like a dream, and she had not even been able to meet the person that she was supposed to meet yet. The girl who was in charge of the Holy Fire and always stared off into the open world, the wandering minstrel Adele. The little Saintess had taken many walks on paths where she would bump into second years, but because Adele was such a person who was in and out of places, it was hard to see her even in the school. The Saintess really wanted to hurry and meet her. The stories of the exam that she had with her friend, and the hut that she went to find in the dead of the night during a storm. The Saintess, who had only ever listened, wanted so badly to share these stories with her friend now that she finally had stories to tell. The silver-haired girl was solemn as she knew that she could not tell the Archbishop about all of this. She could not speak of how the top students of the school had stormed through the dorms and destroyed them. She could also not speak about a fallen noble getting swept up in a murder case. If Verdio, who had always emphasized a pure life, heard about these incidents, the poor old man would be horrified. The girl was sure that he would make her leave the academy at once. It was always hard to refuse the words of the Archbishop, and it was not because he was the master of the mind reading. Then the silver-haired saint wondered if it was because mind reading was an ability that fell under the holy magic category, but it did not work on her. Ever since the girl was young, he had always been like a teacher to her, so that was why it was hard to refuse him. Done with dressing the saint, Belle, the head maid, then informed the Saintess that she could eat comfortably. This made Clarice a little flustered as she had not realized that her nerves were obvious. Well, it was fine for now, as long as she kept the condition that once her identity got caught by another student, she would have to give up her student life. Suddenly, her eyes widened as she recalled that Ed Rothtaylor in fact knew her true identity, so that condition had technically already been met. Of course, it did not seem like he would spill the beans, but what would she do if her snoopy grandpa Verdio happened to meet the young noble? The Saintess panicked at the thought of Verdio somehow finding out that the blonde noble knew of her true identity through mind reading. Meanwhile, Belle was casually asking if the silver-haired girl would like a cup of tea. The girl was trembling and dismissed the tea as her mind wandered to dark thoughts. However, she did have one request, and the Saintess asked the maid to help her prepare to go out. The maid pointed out that they did not have much time, but she did wonder where Clarice suddenly wanted to go in such a hurry. Then the pure maiden uttered the forbidden words, making it clear that she wanted to see Ed Rothtailor, and that she thought that she would calm down if she met him. Clarice said this with the sweetest look on her face, adding that she needed to meet him right away, as quickly as possible, and the maid was stunned to hear this. Belle did not know why, but as she thought of the boy's track record in making ladies turn into blushing and crying messes, the last thing she wanted was for Ed and the Saintess to meet. Meanwhile, the joint combat training match list was out for the students, and they all gathered around in awe to figure out who they had been matched to fight against. Janica sighed that she did not have any challengers for the joint combat training, and Ed asked if she had anyone that she would want to challenge. In truth, the spirit sorcerer thought that sounded a little arrogant. The joint combat training had begun like last year's. It was an exam where students fight each other and have the results reflected in their grades. The fact that lower grades fought with higher grades was also the same, and the only thing that had really changed from last year was the rule that a person could not challenge an opponent through a duel request. According to the current scenario, there were no first years in class at that moment. As a result, they were eager to somehow win against the second year. Since there were many strong characters in the protagonist's year, the first year and the second year matches would be worth watching. However, not many are interested in the third and fourth year matches, so the third and fourth years were busy lounging around and trying to figure out what to eat for dinner. Ed had some leftover meat that he had bought from L'Oreal Inn restaurant, so he wondered if they should just add some salt and cook that. Among the third years that Janica and he belonged to, there were not many strong people. Last year, other than Janica beating Lortel, there had been no other who had been able to defeat their junior. So, the fourth year should be able to challenge anyone and easily win. On the other hand, those that were strong often ended up not receiving any challenges. The spirit sorcerer was happily doting on her man, pointing out that he kept reading the book that Lucy had given him. Ed mumbled that it was an important book, and he thought that he would only be reading this for now. Seeing how the blonde noble was not receiving any challenges, he wondered if he was also considered strong now. Although there was a way to challenge someone first, given Janica's personality, that would be asking for too much. The pink-haired spirit sorcerer pouted while the blonde noble reasoned that he needed to stay low. Just then, a guard yelled out for the students to make way, and a carriage moved through the school carrying the Saintess. Ed was surprised to see the Saintess carriage approach, and he recalled that he needed to take note of just how much the scenario had changed. First of all, it was strange for Clarice to move around at this time. After all, the Saintess preferred to keep her appearances to a minimum and only before a select few. The girl would not be participating in the joint combat training because it overlapped with the Holy Pope's visit, and the boy wondered if the Pope's visit had somehow gotten delayed. The Mick was busy pondering what variable had been big enough to change the Pope's arrival, and he wondered what could have changed. That is also when the boy suddenly noticed that the Saintess was in fact making a beeline for their table. The pure maiden that sparkled like the sun smiled and said that she had planned to send a letter, but she wanted to hurry and meet him, so she had decided to just come. Then she smiled like a bright angel and greeted Ed by name. The Saintess spoke quickly, saying that she could not stay long, but it would be great to share a short conversation with him. The boy was stunned and said that it was an honor. Meanwhile, Janica was over the moon at meeting the saint, and she stuttered out her name with a red blush on her face, saying that it was an honor to meet the Saintess up close. Even if she lived in the countryside, a quarter of the Empire's population were believers of the Telos order, so that kind of reaction to meeting the Saintess was entirely normal. And the main character was at a loss when Janica turned to him in a panic, silently asking what she should do. Meanwhile, seeing the pure maiden with her silvery hair and her perfect smile made it hard to believe that she was the same person as Kylie etched. Through a house of rigorous training, all of her movements had come to exude elegance with no disturbances in emotion. The young blonde had heard that the Holy Pope and the Archbishop were coming to visit soon, and he asked if it was really okay for the Saintess to be with them. However, Clarice replied that the place the Holy Pope was visiting was called Trix Hall, so it was quite a relief that it coincided with where she was. It was time for the matches for the joint combat training to be announced, so she had thought that the boy would be in the area. The Saintess had guessed correctly, and the boy now wondered why she had come to see him. Although the Holy Pope was very sharp and intelligent, the Archbishop video was also quite intelligent. It made her wonder if he was the kind to be able to read minds or something. The Saintess was being rather on the nose when it came to protecting her secret. She emphasized that the way the Archbishop seemed to be able to see exactly what a person was thinking was so fascinating, and it must be a type of holy magic even. The number of hints that she was dropping were atrocious, and she mentioned that there were rumors that the Archbishop somehow had the ability to see everyone's thoughts. Ed was rather stupefied at this blatant and nearly shameless attempt to tell him about Verito's mind-reading powers. It took him a moment, but he finally put the pieces together and his eyes widened in realization. The Saintess had come all this way to have this unnatural conversation to warn him of the Archbishop's odd and very unique ability to read thoughts. The Saint was worried that he would somehow find out that the boy was aware of her identity. That capable Archbishop was indeed very incredible, and the blonde admitted that there was no way that such a man would ever meet with someone like him when he had such a lowly fallen status. The Saintess was surprised to hear this and had admitted that he would be busy partaking in the joint combat training, so he would probably never meet this capable man. Clarice was beyond thrilled to hear this, and she found herself relaxing in relief that the one who knew her secret would never meet the Archbishop. Suddenly, Janica spoke up, nervously playing with her pigtails, and she asked if the Saintess had really come all this way just to see her man. The Saintess was a little surprised by the question, and her oblivious behind agreed that this was exactly why she had come. The spirit sorcerer could not stand that while the Saintess had been nervous about seeing the Holy Pope, she had brought a carriage all the way here just to see Ed. The spirit sorcerer had started looking rather dangerous, so Clarice nervously tried to explain that she was a human too, so it was natural that she would get nervous as well. In the Saintess' attempt to explain why she had come to see the fallen noble, she stumbled and stuttered and stopped making any sense with any of her sentences. Finally, with shaky hands, she just admitted that she had been a little nervous, and she blushed that she had just wanted to see him. She guessed that made sense. Suddenly the Saintess leapt to her feet and ran away, saying that she could not spend too much time with them when the Holy Pope would be arriving soon. So, she just took off as the guards called out after her in concern. Everyone watched as the Saintess suddenly leapt into her carriage, and the carriage zoomed off with immense speed, gone as quickly as it had come. Then everyone suddenly turned their questioning gaze on Ed, evaporating every chance that he had to not stand out. The boy groaned as he was now having a massive headache. Whether the girl came to him as Clarice or Kylie, she was still very hard to spend time with. Meanwhile, the joint training match had begun, and many students cheered as two people stepped into the ring. There was talk of how Ed had not sent any challenge requests either, but there were rumors about how the third year was pretty strong among some of the new students. Of course, they guessed that the blonde was just considered strong among those third-year weaklings. The blonde looked in great despair as he regarded his opponent's shining and dangerous weapon, a large battle axe. His opponent grinned, telling the lad to prepare himself. For the first and second year matches, there was a rule that they could not use mid-rank magic or sharpened blades. However, it was completely different for the upper grades. The giant of a student laughed like a pirate from the Grand Lion and said that he would make it clear before the match. The fourth-year combat student, and the rank 2 student in his faculty, was called Cordak, and he was a man who never let his guard down against his juniors. Cordak made it known that he was Cordak Valadirk. Some of the students were alarmed. They knew that people could not use sharpened weapons because they had the ability to kill, but a blunt weapon could cause so much serious damage. Lots of people were terrified at the very thought of having to go against the fourth-year combat student. So, the announcer made it known that the third-year Ed Rothtailor would now be battling the fourth-year Cordak Valadirk, and the crowd went wild with cheers and excitement. The battle was given the leave to begin, and Cordak leapt, immediately swinging his giant axe with a wicked glint in his eyes. The combat student laughed wickedly, saying that his body was just heating up. He would never go easy just because it's a mock duel, and he laughed, saying that if the blonde had started to feel the fear coursing through his body, then it was still not too late. However, the blonde just scoffed in major annoyance, and he raised his hand, blasting fire magic. The scorch hit the axe attack, blocking the axe from making contact with the third-year student. The main character used the mid-rank magic, particle explosion, and the fourth-year squealed as he took a face full of ire. The fourth-year coughed inside the cloud of smoke, wincing in pain as he wondered what kind of mage would react with that much speed. The fourth-year grit his teeth in pain as he considers the third year. Until last year, there had been nothing much, but now he sees his opponent summoning both fire and water spirits while he is still down. Cordak could not believe what he was facing, and he wondered just where a monster like Ed had even come from. The explosion of both fire and water was immense, nearly covering the whole stage as the combat fourth year was bombarded with attacks. The watching students gulped in awe and intimidation. It had taken about 5 seconds for the fallen blonde noble to thoroughly deal with the laughing and boasting fourth-year combat student. The main character had been careful to ensure that his opponent would not get seriously hurt. He mentally apologized if his opponent had wanted to fight some more, but the blonde had no intention of dragging out this fight, and he congratulated his spirits on the good work that they had done. Suddenly, the auditorium erupted in cheers and shouts. The main character sighed internally as he could not focus on the fight because he had been busy thinking about other things. After the Saintess's explosive visit, the boy had taken the directionally challenged Janica to the stadium, and on his way to fight Cordak at the other stadium, he had met someone completely unexpected. It was Adele, and the free musician happily played her little instrument while gleefully giggling about meeting Ed again. He had asked the girl what she was doing there in Glocked Hall when all the second years should be in Nail Hall. The girl just smiled and called it a coincidence. She had heard even the way the wind blows is fate, so they must be quite closely connected. The blonde did not know how to respond to that, as he was not crazy about connecting with any more strange women. He realized that Adele was in fact uncomfortable. Once the joint combat training was over, he knew that Adele Saris would die. The girl leapt off the window and bowed with a cheery greeting, saying that she had to go. Normally, the boy would weigh the scenarios and just let things play out as they should. But the scenarios had already greatly shifted once he made Tanya become the student council president. Thinking that it was arrogant to try and influence things that he had no power over, and thinking of those who he had to let go of like Professor Glock, the blonde noble could not just turn his back on the girl and let her die. Now, it was difficult for him to let things pass and his hands shook. He had called out and the girl had turned curiously. The main character struggled with his words for a moment before finally speaking and telling the girl that she would die soon. That must be hard to believe, and he had no idea how he would convince her. However, the musician just responded that she was aware of that. With a bright smile that truly surprised the main character, the girl admitted that she knew that she would die. Ed raced out of the combat hall in search of her, wondering if she possessed someone like he did. He worried and ran through the halls, knowing that he needed to find Taylor, in order to see how much the scenario had shifted, and then Adele. However, the fallen noble did not get far before he noticed a switch in the atmosphere and a shake in the floor beneath him. An earthquake had started and the students around him panicked. Even the main character was shocked. Even if the scenario had changed greatly, using predictions and his imagination, the blonde had prepared thoroughly. He flung open the window in confusion so that he could understand what was happening right then. It was something that was far past the realm of his imagination. There was ice rising outside the window, a grand and magic blue wall of power. Ed stared in shock and he wondered why that was here at a time like this. A being known to have gone extinct even within legend, a great calamity that could not be stopped through human force alone. The great creature broke through the earth and threw the school in turmoil. The high-class Sylvania Academy was such an unsafe place for any serious parent to send their children, unless they wanted them to get real-life experience of fighting monsters and having near-death experiences, for the failed swordsman of Sylvania's final boss rose from the earth. The sacred lance dragon had awoken and it towered over the school like a living mountain. Well then, I guess we've seen a lot of romance and side character development in the last few uploads, so now it's finally time for the main thread of the story to make its appearance. I can't wait to see what kind of monster this dragon will turn out to be, and given how little our hero is prepared for it, I'm sure everyone is curious to see how the students will fight it off. So stay tuned and subscribe for more, and I'll catch you guys in future episodes as soon as new chapters are released. Until next time.